Hey guys, what's up? It is Ripe again, back with more Neighbors from Hell and revenge stories. In today's title story, OP's crazy neighbor cuts OP's tree in half and then gets sued in court. If you are a fan of tree law, then this is a story you will not want to miss. And now let's dive right into the story. The first one is titled, Neighbor Cut My Tree in Half, She Regrets It in Court. Most people say that a tree is just a tree. That may be true to some people, but when you have several North American maple trees in your yard that are older than your grandma, I think that they deserve a little more respect. I never would have thought that I would be going through a dispute with my neighbor about tree laws, but life is always full of fun and interesting situations. Let me start by saying that I live in a house that is really old, 102 to be exact, and was owned by my grandparents, who passed on the property to my mother, who gave it to me and my husband. It is almost 2 acres of land with many mature trees along the back and side of the property. This house and land are more than just a home and are very important to me and my family. That includes all the cousins and aunts and uncles that have spent so much of their lives here. After a few years of my husband and I living there and fixing up the house, one of the grandkids I used to play with as a child took over the neighbor's property after her grandmother passed away. I was actually pretty excited about this. She and I had always gotten along and had a good time together. Maybe she and I could get back to that same old friendship. But boy, was I wrong. I went over to meet her, let's call her Anne, after the first week that they were moving in. I had this idea in my head that we would be excited to see each other, but what I got instead was more of a cold hello and brush off. I know that she was probably under a lot of stress dealing with the property and her grandmother's passing, but it seemed more like she was distracted by a new opportunity and not grieving. Anyways, I ended up trying to hold a conversation, but decided to politely excuse myself once I realized she was uninterested in me. I was disappointed in this interaction, but it was not a big deal. A few weeks pass and I realized that they are having a lot of trucks going to and from her house, like they may be renovating. My suspicions were correct when I noticed the new roof and siding going up. I thought about popping over and checking in again, but I figured it would come across as too nosy. That is what my husband said at least. A few more weeks pass and the renovation continues inside. I am working outside in my garden when I notice though that they are now starting to look at some of the surrounding trees and foliage on their property. The thing that caught my attention the most was that they were also observing many of the trees that are on our property and not theirs. I decided to assume that nothing will come of that and carried on with my things. Later that same week, I catch her husband back over near my property line, spray painting the ground and my trees. I have several different types of trees in my yard, but I especially admire the North American maples. There were 3 mature ones that separated our properties that I had known to be there since my grandparents purchased the house and land. I was not quite sure of the age, but I assumed the trees were at least 70 years old. I became suspicious and decided to investigate where he was poking around in my favorite trees. I asked him politely how he was doing and if there was anything I could help him with. He looked at me like I had 2 heads and proceeded to chuckle, saying that he was fine. I found this odd. Surely he doesn't think that this is on their property line, right? After a moment of searching for the right words, I asked him what he was doing on my property and that those trees he was spray painting were not his. He looked at me like I grew a 3rd head in the time I was standing there with a He firmly stated that the trees were not on my property and that I needed to hire a surveyor to come out and confirm this. As far as he was concerned, he was right and I was wrong. I did argue for a moment, but became frustrated when he would only repeat himself and walked back to my house. I was unsure what I should do, but decided the first thing would be to confirm the property lines before they did any damage. Within a few days a surveyor had been out and I had proof of where our property ended and that the trees were indeed not theirs. I was glad of the timing because the next day the husband and some other guys were starting to clear some brush and whatnot, which was thankfully on their land this time. He did not look too happy to see me when I approached them, but was polite enough. I showed him the papers and the property map showing where theirs ended and mine began, and asked them to leave my trees and yard alone while they did their cleaning up. Judging by the aggressive removal of his hat and rubbing of his balding head, he was pretty pissed. This is funny because I did exactly what he told me to do. "You are kidding me, right?" he asked, stating that they wanted to clear the area so they could add a barn and a garage and that I was going to make this harder than it needed to be. I explained that I'm not trying to make anything hard on anyone, but that I just want them to leave my trees alone. After all, one of them still has the board and rope that my grandpa hung as a swing for us as children. We both went our separate ways, but Anne was quick to come and confront me afterwards. That evening, she pulled into my driveway in her fancy BMW with a screeching halt, banging on the screen door like she was the cops. My husband answered the door to her red and angry face, pointing at him, demanding that she see the surveyor paperwork and that she has her own documents stating otherwise. I quickly went to the door, not afraid to speak to her face to face, and stepped onto the porch to talk with this irate idiot. She is not going to bully me or my husband, and her behavior was childlike. I told her that I wanted to see her paperwork after she stopped shouting about how I was causing trouble for no reason. I explained to Anne this is our property and I know she knows this. Those trees were always on our land and she used to play on the same damn swing that is still hanging out there on that North American maple tree. I became so tired of hearing her talk like a fool that I did end up showing her the surveyor documents in the hopes that it would shut her up. It mostly did, as she just spewed some profanities at me and left, throwing gravel all over as she peeled out of my driveway. Several weeks went by and not much happened. They stopped messing around near the trees and I assumed that the ordeal had passed. My husband and I had our anniversary coming up, so we had planned to be gone for 2 weeks out of the country. When we came back from our vacation, it was clear from almost a mile away that something did not seem right with our property. There was something off about the tree line on the west side that was adjacent to their land. As we pulled up, I couldn't help but let out a strangled cry as 2 of the trees were completely cut down and the one with the rope swing had been cut practically in half. Literally chopped all the branches off one side, supposedly the part that is on their land. This was tree murder. That woman did this on purpose and illegally. After letting out my emotions and sadness, I quickly opened up Google and called an arborist and a lawyer. To make things a little weirder and worse, she had her brother, who is not a good lawyer obviously, draw up paperwork that stated that the surveyor was wrong and that the property lines were off by about 6 feet. Finding a lawyer that wanted to deal with tree laws and property disputes was a little trickier than the arborist, but all the work was totally worth it in the end. I gave the lawyer her BS paperwork and our pictures of the property, the incidents leading up to it, and of course the surveyor documents. I'm not sure if any of you are actually aware of how expensive trees are, but mature trees especially are crazy expensive. I didn't even know what kind of money we were looking at when I started the whole thing. The arborist that came out confirmed that these were indeed very old and mature North American maple trees. He actually estimated the 2 that were cut down to be almost 100 years old and the 1.5 was about 85 years old. My jaw dropped when he handed me papers saying that the total amount in damages was over $100,000. Our lawyer also recommended suing further for damage to property and emotional distress. I thought that emotional distress was a little much, but I was really torn up about it. These were ancient trees that meant a lot to me and my memory of my grandparents. Needless to say, after finding that perfect lawyer and gathering all of my information, it did not take long for the court to award us over $150,000 in damages and distress. Each tree was worth over $35,000 and the rest was for distress, property damage and reimbursement for the lumber of my trees that they sold and profited on. On top of that, they also had to replace those trees with new ones, which actually took the price to over $225,000 when it was all said and done. The moral of the story, guys, is don't mess with people's trees. And of course, Ripe Stars, as Reddit veterans, we all know how expensive trees can be, but that is still a good moral code to live by. And if you have watched until here and enjoy the stories about tree law and awful neighbors, then please don't forget to post some star emojis in the comments and maybe even give the video a like if you want to support my channel. Thank you so much in advance. The next one is titled, "They parked in my spot that I pay for, so I blocked them in all day." In my complex we have specifically assigned spots that you have to pay for. This person, I guess, doesn't want to pay for a spot, so they park on the street all the time. It is doable, but a huge pain in the butt since you cannot leave it overnight without a notice from management. The first time they had done this, I confronted them as I happened to catch them as they were getting out of their car. They claimed they lived in the townhouse right next to my spot, but that someone had parked there, so they parked in my spot. That would make sense to me if I had ever seen their car park in that spot before and that the car wasn't there all the time anyway. Also, the owner of the car was screaming at me while their friend was the calm one. I was fed up because other strangers had parked in my spot before, making me have to park on the street. For context, yes, we do have garage doors as it is an underground parking, but management has never gotten them operational for some reason. So this same person eventually parked in my spot once again and I was done. Normally I would just call security and they would come to threaten to tow the car, but because it is the pandemic, they are not sending people out unless it is a serious situation. So I happily parked my car right behind theirs. Luckily I own a tiny car, so it is small enough to effectively double park, but still leave even big SUVs to get by in our underground parking. I left a note on my car saying, "Note to management/security, car with license XYZ parked in my spot. I will be out of town until tomorrow. If any problems, call me with the number on file." Of course, I was not out of town at all. Then I came back, went out for a day to give them time to get their car, and I have never seen it parked in my spot since. Only on the street. And a user in the comments said, "I lived in a small apartment building. My neighbor's boyfriend parked in such a way that he was blocking my parking spot. I left a polite note. The second time I left a stern note. I ran into him. He screamed at me to not leave notes on his car. The third time I parked behind him, blocking him in. The neighbor knocks on my door, meekly asks me to move. Sure, next time I need to use my car. I seldom use the car, I had a motorcycle. So my car sat there for 6 or 7 days. And I have to say, Ripe Stars, that is just genius petty revenge, and I would almost say that the one in the comments was a little bit better than the one in the story itself. If you have ever had any parking spot disputes with your neighbors, please feel free to share these issues either in the comments or on r/Ripe Stories on Reddit. The next one is titled, "Rude Woman Gets What She Deserves." So I just found this subreddit today and had to share my favorite revenge story. I'm a super nice, well-mannered guy usually. I typically never snap on anyone or get in fights with others, but once in a while I just cannot help myself. I was flying out to Denver to visit my family for Thanksgiving this past year. Everything is going fine, I am on an aisle seat, life is great. 3 or so minutes after takeoff, I decided to recline my seat. Now keep in mind, the pilot has not taken the fasten seatbelt light off yet and told us we could do so. But I figure, hey, no one will say anything if I do this right. I know what I'm doing. You don't just slam the seat back, that stuff is for amateurs and hyperactive children. Every decent human being knows you push the button on the armrest and gently recline the seat ever so slightly so as to say, "Hey neighbor behind me, this is coming back." You hold for at least 10 seconds and then start to slowly recline the whole way. I did this, I'm an expert traveler. Now I am relaxed, I am ready to nap and enjoy my time off work. When suddenly my seat gets shoved hard, and again and again and again, until I turn around to see the culprit. It's a woman in her late 20s. She was pretty, clean and had a total Karen face. You know the type, everything they say and do looks rude, so I'm like, "Excuse me, is there a problem?" And she says, "You're not supposed to do that yet." And I say, "Why not?" At this point I know I am technically in the wrong here, but I figure playing stupid cannot hurt. However, she replies, "The pilot tells you when you can recline your seat. Have you never flown before?" In a super Karen-y and argumentative tone. I retort, "Are you gonna tell the teacher?" before she can even respond. "This is your captain speaking. We are now at a cruising altitude and you can go ahead and recline your seat and move about the cabin." Clearly, this debate is over. I turn forward and we are done with it. As I am getting off the plane, I make a point to move as slow as possible, since she will be getting out after me. I help anyone and everyone I can with their bags because I can tell she is in a hurry to get away from me. I am basically being as nice as possible to others, completely out of spite for this rude Karen. She finally storms past me as we exit the plane and head to baggage claim. She darts a couple of mean scowls in my direction at baggage check too. I meet my parents at arrivals and I am off. End of story. Or so I thought. Onto the return flight, I really thought I was screwed. I was running late for my flight and was the last one to board. I get to my seat and who am I sitting directly behind? That damn Karen. Damn it, surely she will make my life hell. We make eye contact, things feel pretty awkward in this moment, but she just couldn't resist it. There is an old man in front of her who is at least 80, that has his seat already reclined. We haven't even left the gate, and just like before, instead of saying something to the man, she just starts pushing his seat until he felt compelled to say something. He says in his sweet little old man's voice, "Excuse me, could you try not to do that? I have back problems." She battles him on the issue. He asked kindly for her to let him recline his seat for his bad back one more time. She calls over the flight attendant. The flight attendant is in a weird situation here. Technically the lady is right, but she is obviously being a Karen. Everyone in the situation is struggling to find a solution when suddenly I knew exactly what to do. I stand up and say, "Excuse me, he can switch seats with me." I turn to the family sitting behind me. "Would you mind if he reclined his seat for his back?" I say this very loudly so I can draw as many people into this conversation as possible. Everyone needs to know how big of a Karen this woman is. The mother directly behind me says, "Oh no, that's no problem at all." The old man thanks me, the flight attendant thanks me, and now I am exactly where I wanted to be. The power position. I take my seat in front of this Karen and shoot her a look as I sit down. She is not happy about this situation at all by the look on her face. The plane leaves the gate and hits the runway. Now, as soon as we hit the runway, I press the recline button. I don't push back though, no, I will let gravity take care of that. I just sit there and wait. The plane starts to move and then he hits the jets. My seat goes flying back. I hear my seat hit her iPad and it falls into the aisle. The woman is instantly infuriated and starts pushing on my seat. I put my headphones in, she pushes the flight attendant button, obviously to tattle on me. But the flight attendant doesn't get up during takeoff and we all know it. The attendant never shows up, not until after the captain has allowed us to recline our seats anyway. I suffered through 5 minutes of seat kicking for this moment. I'm not going to F this one up. The lady tells the attendant that I lowered my seat. The attendant says that he is allowed to have his seat back now though. I cannot tell him to put it up. If you keep making issues for other passengers, I'm going to have to move you. The flight attendant doesn't even entertain an opportunity to let this woman reply and just leaves at the end of her sentence. It was honestly rude of the attendant, but we all know that Karen deserved it. When the drink cart comes around, the attendant offers me a drink on the house. I order a scotch and say, Wow, that's so nice of you. And turn around to get one final look at my victim as I make a cheers gesture to those behind me. I hope your Thanksgiving was awful, Karen. You got bested. Update: wow, thanks everyone for commenting. I'm not really as big of an a-hole as this one story makes me seem, but I can assure you that OP is still a bundle of sticks. With that being said, I didn't realize there was such a huge controversy on the recline issue. I honestly reclined a minute early though. As someone who is 5'9", I've honestly never had an issue with someone reclining. I guess I will be more conscious of my ogre flight mates next time. But trust me, this lady was rude to no end. Also, I am posting in petty revenge. What did you expect? Of course I was going to come across as a total POS. Hands down the pettiest thing I've ever done, but thanks for taking the time to read my story. Also, no regrets. I would not undo this if I was given the chance. And ripe stars, I gotta say, I have been on airplanes many times and I rarely have any issues with neighbors reclining their seat. The reason for that is that I really sleep a lot in airplanes and that I fall asleep fairly quickly if I want to. People that flew with me in the past have also dubbed me as the worst flight companion imaginable simply because I sleep so much and they essentially could also fly alone. But yeah, that makes long distance travel much easier. And ripe stars, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you still cannot get enough of my content, then I would highly suggest to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will soon show up in the left corner of the screen. In addition, I would really appreciate it if you could not only subscribe to the channel but also turn on the bell notifications, which you can do by clicking on the little bell icon right next to the subscribe button. This will help my channel tremendously and this will make sure that you don't miss any of my videos. Furthermore, if you want to see additional ripe content that I don't post on YouTube, then I would suggest to head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 exclusive videos that you will not see anywhere else. Thank you so much for your amazing daily support and I hope to see you again tomorrow.